I'm very excited to introduce our final keynote of the day. Fred Iutzi is the new president of the Land Institute. You heard Fred Kirschman talk a little bit about the Land Institute this morning. It's really one of those organizations that I have looked up to my entire life. They're not only doing innovative work on resiliency in the food system and perennial crops, but really growing and cultivating the next generation of leaders through their fellows programs. Fred grew up in an Illinois farm and has focused his career on the sustainability of agriculture in rural communities. Prior to moving to Kansas, he managed agriculture, energy, and cooperative development programs for the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs at Western Illinois University. His ties to the Land Institute run very deep. Fred joined the Institute's Graduate Fellows Program in 2002, where he studied the possibility of growing small grains and mixtures with forage legumes. He has subsequently attended 7 Fellows workshops at the Institute. He earned his bachelor's degree in geography and plant sciences at the University of Missouri-Columbia and a master's degree in sustainable agriculture and agronomy at Iowa State University. He has served in numerous leadership roles at environmental and agricultural organizations, including vice chair of the board of the Agricultural Watershed Institute and the founding chair of the Illinois Biomass Working Group. I'm so pleased that he could be here today to talk about both the legacy and the future of the Land Institute and their work to restore soil health and to improve agriculture here in the Midwest and all over the globe. Please join me in welcoming Fred to the stage.
Thank you, Danny. So I am the husband of a woman who was raised on the south side of Chicago, deep in White Sox territory. So I want to start by congratulating the Cubs on bringing a second national title to Chicago. Now, for my part, my roots are in west central Illinois, where my family has been farming for 9 generations. Today, my parents and my brother still operate the 1,000-acre corn and soybean farm that I grew up on. So as a member of that farm family and subsequently as an agronomist, as a certified crop advisor, I've had a pretty good vantage point on conventional agriculture. And so I've seen firsthand the integrity with which conventional farmers are seeking sustainability. I've seen the improvements that have been made in reducing soil erosion, use of the most toxic pesticides, things of that nature. At the same time, I've had a front row seat on the challenge in taking those improvements very much farther. We have a grain crop agricultural system that's stretched to its limits in terms of yield, in terms of water quality, in terms of further improvements in soil quality, and we're at diminishing returns here with that system. So I can also say, having seen conventional ag firsthand, that we need a lot more organic farming. We need a lot more of what farmers who self-identify as sustainable ag practitioners are doing. That's critical if we want to continue making progress in the near term on environmental quality. But I can tell you that right now I'm not focused really on either of those domains, conventional ag or organic ag. This past summer, I moved out of a house where my children were the 6th generation of the family to live on a family farmstead, and we moved to Kansas. I resigned from a job that was my part of a 4-generation family legacy of organizing agricultural cooperatives, and I took a different job at the Land Institute. But let me show you why I left and what I'm excited about that we're working on, and I'll use a little visual aid to do that. So, right here on the crop on the left, which you're seeing the first, about 5 feet 10 inches here of a 14-foot banner. The crop on the left is annual wheat of the kind that's grown especially in the U.S. Great Plains, but across the country to some extent. The crop on the right is Kernza, which is our trade name for the perennial crop developing by domesticating intermediate wheatgrass. Now, there's a lot of good conversation that we can have about how we grow the crop on the left optimally, how we get further improvements out of this annual cropping system. And that's a critical topic, especially in the short term here. Thank you, Karen. She's seen this drill before. Yeah. But I will tell you that there's a difference between the crop now on the bottom here and the crop on the top in terms of fundamental potential to contribute carbon, to deliver it deep into the soil profile where it can be sequestered, can be turned into soil organic matter. There's a fundamental difference in potential between the crop on the top and the crop on the bottom in terms of sponsoring a favorable microenvironment for beneficial soil organisms. And there's a difference in fundamental potential in fully exploring the soil profile for nutrients and water, which are traits that are key to resilience in the face of climate change. So this is what we're working on. I rooted my lifestyle and moved to Kansas this year. Thank you, Karen. In other words, it's all about putting down roots by staying alive year to year without the need for fresh soil disturbance every year or for the plant to resume to start growing all over again from scratch from a seed. The root systems of perennial plants have the ability to become many times more extensive than their annual counterparts. Native vegetation as a component of native ecosystems over the long run is the only land cover that we have any data to suggest is capable of maintaining our soil resource and of creating a fully unleaky ecosystem relative to nutrients, relative to soil loss. Native vegetation is the only thing that's done that. So we believe at this point that it's critical to extend that high functionality that we find in native ecosystems to the agricultural system. It's particularly critical to do it in the area of grain crop agriculture. Grains and oilseeds directly or indirectly supply around 85% of the calories that humanity consumes. So if we're going to have a sustainable agriculture, grain crop agriculture is going to have to be part of that. Now, the key features of native plants in native ecosystems the world over is that those plant communities are predominantly composed of plants that A, are perennial, that regrow from year to year without starting over from a seed, and B, grow in mixtures of species, not in monoculture. So accordingly, at the Land Institute, we're focused on breeding grain crops that are A, perennial, and that are B, suitable for growing in mixtures, thereby mimicking the structure and function of native prairie. So this is going to result in an agriculture that's going to look quite a bit different eventually than the farming that we do today, which has given us and many others pause at various times. But one thing I come back to is that the way that my parents farm today would look very strange to my great-great-great-great-grandparents who started farming in the same region in previous centuries. And so I don't think we have any reason to believe that the way that our descendants farm is necessarily going to look a whole lot like the way that we farm now. So we feel that it's appropriate and necessary to be bold in pursuing what the data suggests is necessary to maintain environmental quality. So I've shown you Kernza here, our sort of proxy for wheat here. Another example of the work that we're doing is in our perennial sorghum project. Grain sorghum, or milo, is a traditional crop throughout the U.S. Across history, although these days production is mostly concentrated in the Great Plains. Sorghum is traditionally noted for being highly resilient in the face of drought stress relative to other annual crops. And so from the start, it's a potential adaptation strategy to climate change. Now at the Land Institute, our scientists are interbreeding annual grain sorghum with perennial wild relatives of sorghum to get a crop that has the perenniality of the wild relatives and has a grain yield ultimately approaching that of an annual crop is our long-term objective and what we believe from a plant genetics and a plant physiology standpoint we can accomplish. So that perennial sorghum crop we expect to decrease soil erosion, to increase soil quality, to decrease water pollution, and again to both mitigate the effects of climate change by sequestering carbon and be more resilient to the effects that we have by being more drought resilient. But we don't believe that this sorghum story stops in the United States, which has been the context of my remarks so far. We have collaborations underway in this crop in particular with grassroots institutions in 5 sub-Saharan African countries, most intensively in Mali and in Uganda. One of the key players in our sorghum research program is Fiona Nabukulu, who joined our research staff in Kansas in 2013 after receiving her PhD in plant breeding and genetics. Dr. Nabukulu has helped us understand that there's a broader significance to the applied biology work that we're doing breeding perennial grain sorghum, particularly a broader significance in her home country of Uganda. Where the agricultural commodity crops, the cash crops like coffee, are the primary focus of men in farming communities. And they are dealing with markets that are increasingly squeezed by a lot of factors in the global marketplace. It's the women in the communities that traditionally raise the grain crops that go to actually feed people. And so as we work with these women on perennial grain sorghum, it means that they're holding the keys to improving livelihoods in their families and in their communities. And as we work with their local institutions so that they can create perennial sorghum varieties that are locally adapted, these Ugandan women will also hold the keys to responding to climate change and soil degradation. So as Fiona has pointed out to us, by helping in this way, this applied biology project can help provide a hopeful future in sub-Saharan Africa. And so the broader point is that a hopeful future for the food system and for communities around the world is the key implication of the work. We're convinced that to achieve real long-term environmental sustainability, grain crop agriculture has to be perennialized. But we're equally convinced that by perennializing agriculture, by overhauling it to function in right relationship with ecosystems, we can also teach ourselves to have more deeply rooted relationships with one another, to be in right relationships, to found our communities and economies on justice and respect, and ultimately to farm a future with hope. Thank you very much.